The good news is not only for food, this is also being used for other medical purpose, like treating chronic diseases and, just train the bacteriophage in such a way that it goes and target to that cell, right? Killing cancer cells like that. So these are all emerging techniques outside of food industry as well. So we are lucky to have in this field using this technique for the consumer safety. From here now on. So combining these techniques with other technology also makes a bigger, greater, deal and making people safe and mobile for the consumer of these products.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Siroj Pokharel from Cal Poly. How are you today?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Will, and I'm fortunate to be here with you.
Well, we're glad to have you on today. Siroj, some of our listeners may not be familiar with you. And so before we start talking about the topic, why don't we have you just do a brief introduction of yourself?
So I am Siroj Pokharel, and talking about my background, I started with veterinary science as my undergraduate degree. So I used to, check on small animals. At that time, it was 2005, 6, 7, around that time. But later, I decided to pursue masters here in the US. So I came in the US in 2009, early 2009, and started my career in mid science, doing my master's. It was at Nebraska Lincoln at that time, so I spent 2 years my life there, and then I started working at Tyson Food as a food quality, food safety in that department down in Texas. So that kind of gave me an idea of what the food safety is working in this area now, so I can realize looking back, so 2011, 2012, 13, the outbreak that had happened at that time and the FISMA regulation and everything came up at that time, right?
Okay.
I thought like, okay, this is the right time to jump into food safety field. And I decided to pursue my PhD in food safety, food microbiology. And that was with Dr. Mindy Brashears at Texas Tech from 2013, 14, 15, and 16. I graduated from there. And later on, I decided to go to Penn State for my postdoctoral research for a year and a half. And then I joined Cal Poly. Now this is my position as assistant professor. August, it's almost 5 years. So being here for this amount of time already, working, teaching, and doing research in food safety and microbiology.
Well, that's a fascinating story. And I think you're absolutely right. Food safety is something that maybe here in the United States, many of us take for granted. And yet there's so many things we should be thinking about on a daily basis. And especially even from the swine side, we think about raising the pig, but we sometimes forget it doesn't stop once we send that pig to market. And you're doing some really fascinating work. And I think it's something that we should talk to you about today. And it's really around the use of bacteriophages and food safety. And so maybe I think what we'll do is start with just that. What is a bacteriophage? That's something that maybe some of our listeners may not be very familiar with.
Yes, why not? So bacteriophage is not a good or like a new technique, by the way. So it was used early 1900s and so on and so forth. But at the time it stopped for some time. But later on, we are starting carrying this research again. So bacteriophages are the virus. So what they do is they eat bacteria. So the name bacteriophage comes from bacteria as a bacteria itself, and phage is eating behavior of the virus. So they just get inside the bacteria, use their metabolism, energy, and everything, whatever they need to grow and multiply inside the bacteria, burst their cell out and kill them and survive. So that's what it is. But we can find the bacteriophage everywhere in our surrounding, in the environment. Luckily, because I'm working in pork, meat, or chicken. If we go and find out their environment, to look into their environment and try to isolate some bacteriophages, we find more. We find many of those in the niche area, niche environment, and also in sewers. We find bacteriophage in sewers in millions and billions of particles there.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. So here's a virus that can infect a bacterium. The bacterium replicates that virus, and then the virus is released as that bacterium cell is destroyed, essentially.
Usually.
Which can sound a little bit scary, maybe to some folks about turning a virus loose, right? But it's very targeted. Is that correct?
Thank you for pointing that out, and that's a very good question. Because of this COVID pandemic that we are going through, right? It's kind of scary to talk about virus one more time. But you're right; they are targeted, and also if we look into USDA and FDA websites, they have recognized these as safe for food products, so we can use them, and they do not harm human cells or human microbiome, but they are targeted for specific pathogens, like, for example, let's say Salmonella in meat or E. coli 157 in beef products.
Okay. So are we currently using bacteriophages in food production today?
Yes, we are, and there are several of them, recognized as safe for the food products environment, and several industry they are using it, and some of them are, in the research phase, establishing some of their own virus phases to act against the outbreak causing organisms like pathogenic types. And it depends on a lot of research, and it also depends on the environment where your establishment or the industry is, because that also decide what type of pathogen in that environment. So also on top of that is the type of food product that we are working on. So chicken is different than pig and then the beef carcasses, right? So those all matters. But yes, there are some already using those.
Okay. So when you talk about these bacteriophages and food, how are you applying them to the food?
So just talking about my research as a whole, because I try to mimic the industry practice in my lab. For example, I get talking about pork loins, of course, and then, for example, if the industry would like to will marination on those pork loins with a different chemicals or a seed, I also applied those in my lab, and on top of that, I put already prepared bacteriophage solution at certain concentration, just to see how much is needed to control the growth of microorganisms that I also supplied on the pork products. So I have the combination of the bad bugs like the bacteria that we're talking about here, and the good bugs that I also prepare in the lab, bacteriophage. So we use both of them on top of the pork products and look at the counts later on if they had already eliminated certain levels of bacteria or not. And so it depends on the process the industry does for their products. And so we can mimic any of those type of processes in our lab and look into the strategy.
So you actually brought up an interesting point. You said that you put both good bacteria on the meat, and then we're putting the bacteriophages on to kill the bad bacteria. And so that might be something that some of our listeners may not be familiar with. You had mentioned a marinade and putting it over the loin. So what kind of bacterium are we talking about that might go on the product?
So for this specific research, we used Salmonella, a different strain of Salmonella. Salmonella is a bad bug that causes, gastroenteritis, fever, diarrhea, vomiting, like food poisoning symptoms. So what we can do in our BSL2 is biological safety level 2 lab is we can actually go there and culture those pathogenic bacteria that is actually can make people sick, and use that in a secure way on those food products. For example, I can, purchase a loin or, get it from our meat processing center, the actual loin that customer buy. And I can actually take that in my lab and I can, prepare the inoculum of that bacteria in certain concentration that we can measure at the end. So in that process, I also marinate those, pork loins for certain hours, let's say 2 hours, right? And what we do is, during the marination process, I put the inoculum on top, or sometime I have to, put the pork loin inside the broth, the liquid bacterial solution. So when we take it out, it all captures all the bacteria on the surface. And later on is the treatment application. The treatment application that we are talking about here is bacteriophage application on top of already contaminated pork products. And you keep there, for 1 hour or 2 hour, let's say how long you want to do that process in your industry. So after a certain time, and you would check throughout the time frame how much, the concentration of bacteria is being reduced by the application of bacteriophage, in my case. And we measure all those, concentration throughout the time period and check the growth of bacteria.
And that's really intriguing. So, one of the questions I have then is, can we just use the bacteriophages on the surface of a meat product, or can we inject it? I mean, I know when we're talking about a pork loin, it's generally the surface that we're worried about, but think about ground beef or ground pork. Do we mix it? What options do we have there, I guess?
So, very good question. So the two types of meat I would like to say, one is, not intact, like the ground products, macerated products, and often, those vacuum tumbled or marinated injected products. Those are not intact products or non-intact products. On the other side, we have intact products which are not harmed or have done any of those things that I mentioned before. So in that case, it's supposed to be the internal core of the meat should be sterile with any contaminants. The only the surface. So in that case, we can only apply for the surface. But as you have asked, the ground meat products or, vacuum tumbled or, pulverized or macerated or needle injected, anything, what it does actually is during that process, the surface bacteria, if there are any, can slowly migrate inside the core. So in that case, we may need to inject the bacteriophage or spray on top, and again go through the same process as it goes with the regular meat, and we can distribute it throughout the products. Make sure it's actually getting all tissues and surface areas into it.
How long would I have to expose a piece of meat to the bacteriophages for them to work?
In my research, I have found out within 1 hour that is enough time to get at least 1.5 to almost 2 log reduction. When I'm talking about 2 logs, it's 90%, 99% reduction of bacteria from the surface. So when I'm saying 1 log reduction, that is a 90% reduction. So to get more than 99% reduction, I think more than 1 hour should be there. Um, and since we'll be using special type of bacteriophage, that is lytic bacteriophage, what it does is, it goes through the sword cycle inside the bacteria and kill it immediately. So in this case, we have seen very short amount of exposure time on the meat surface. Within 1 hour, it's getting the actual kill on bacteria.
Okay.
And then what temperature would we have to keep that at, right? So some bacteria do better at warmer temperatures, and obviously we put meat in cold temperature to try to stop the growth. And so if we're putting a virus in and we want the virus to use the bacteria machinery, do we want the temperature to be warmer so the bacteria is metabolizing and working, or is it okay to be in the cooler temperatures?
I would suggest keeping that in the cooler temperature. And since I'm saying I'm mimicking what the industry does, right? So everything that I'm doing here should mimic the same process that the industry follows. So marination in cold environment, not keeping it outside of the room temperature where it gives more opportunity for the opportunistic pathogen or other bacteria to grow on the surfaces of food products. So always working in the cold environment in that case would be the best practice. Not only for the kill, but also not to stop, not to grow the harmful pathogens.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's a very good point. So, in your research, then, as you've been talking, you've been using pork loins and you've been using bacteriophages. What are some of the common organisms that you're targeting for pork specifically?
So the common organisms that how we find that out is, of course, looking at different outbreaks that have happened in the past related to pork and pork products. So I have seen, several salmonella, different strains of salmonella that has caused several outbreaks in the past in the US and also in the Canada. So we collect those data and try to use those organisms specific that has caused the outbreaks. If we are lucky, we'll find the same strain that caused the outbreak in the past and use that as a case study. But if not, then we use closely related those salmonella strain types. And in my case, I have used all three different strains of salmonella and make a cocktail solution of that bacteria and apply on top of the meat products. So it depends on the actual outbreak causing organisms. If I'm talking about chicken, that would be a different story because there are different bugs for chicken or the beef products, the same
Mhm.
bugs.
One of the things I think about is just the environment when you're processing food and the equipment and the concerns of listeria and some of the other foodborne pathogens. Is there thought or discussion around spraying bacteriophages into the facility periodically to try to reduce those counts?
Absolutely, that's a very good question. For the listeria, we always have found, for the products, for example, ready-to-eat products, those are most often being contaminated with Listeria monocytogenes, one specific a species of Listeria monocytogenes, causing thing is they form a very good biofilm on, for example, stainless steel that we use to slice the product after cooking, after going through the lithium process or lithium step, right? So that may cross contaminate the products. So yes, there are some research, and also there are some bacteriophages out in the market already, selling as a Listeria control bacteriophage. So I haven't done myself that research, but it's very good moving forward. Just to see on the stainless steel and also several other food contact surfaces like the board cutting boards, for example, right in the kitchen. So that can be used, yes, of course. Yeah,
That's very interesting.
it is.
So I'm going to go back a step, though. You were talking about your work with salmonella and finding different strains of salmonella to put into your cocktail before you put that onto your pork loin. Is there a limitation with the bacteriophages where they can only work with certain strains of a specific organism, or are they more general? I guess I always thought bacteriophages were a little bit more general, but maybe the way you talk, they're maybe a little bit more specific than I thought.
They act to like very specific bacteria. So it's better, of course, because so we can target like a specific type of pathogen. For example, the pathogen is Listeria monocytogenes or Salmonella in this case, right? So there are specific bacteriophages they target Salmonella only. So they do not work for like they do not control E. coli for say. So because their mechanism of action or the thing what we have found is they means that the bacteriophages were isolated from such environment. For example, the pork sewer or the pork environment or the pig fillet.
Uh-huh.
Bacteriophages isolated from there are more acting against the pathogen. Those are more prone to the pork products or more easily found in that environment, right? That's why they are there, of
Okay.
course, to start with. So they are very strain specific, or even the pathogen specific types.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, I know you mentioned earlier that some of these are already being used in the industry, but let's talk about kind of how you view it maybe 5 years from now. How would you view this technology being used in our packing facilities and meat processing facilities?
It's a very good question. Talking about the industry, we are still like from the industry perspective, we're still thinking about it, and talking about the standard that we have to maintain in the industry, right? At so many research we have to do in this case, and just to make sure this is actually what is working, and to get the log reduction, the industry requirement on to pass their lot, to pass their products to the market, they have to pass the microbiological conditions too set forth by USDA, of course. So, so many research has to do on this regard, and it doesn't work alone, of course. So we have to have multitude of treatment planned ahead. For example, combining this with organic acids, those are also grass or recognized as safe to eat. Combining, I have seen research combining these with UV radiations or ozone or several other treatments. So if we have all of those combined and applied in the industry, I think in the coming years the industry will grow through this route because it's easy to culture, easy to prepare, and easy to apply to the products.
Mhm. Where where in the harvesting chain would you anticipate the product being applied?
So I would suggest applying towards the end after the lethal step because this particle may if you go through cookie step or thermal step after application, then it might not work. Or if you apply organic acids on top of it, it may not work because of that low pH concentration. So we have to be very careful on using what step of the food products down the line. So after the lethal step, I would say in general, so we could apply that in the lethal step that way. Yeah, actually work.
Okay, very good. So I think that answers a lot of my questions. But I do want to kind of go back to this whole bacteriophage, just general conversation, and go back to food safety or
There you go.
safety of this technology. Because I think anytime we introduce technology, and particularly if we're talking about a bacteriophage, um, people kind of wonder if this is really approved. And so as you mentioned earlier, it is approved, it is safe. Anything else we need to be aware of in terms of just this general um, use for the consumer education purpose?
Not at all. But the good news is not only for food. This is also being used for other medical purpose. Like treating chronic diseases, and just train the bacteriophage in such a way that it goes and target to that cell, right, killing cancer cells like that. So these are all emerging techniques outside of food industry as well. So we are lucky to have in this field using this technique for the consumer safety. From here now on. So combining these techniques with other technology also makes a bigger, greater, deal, and making people safe, before the consumer of these products.
Wow.
So it's always a good news. Yeah.
That's great news. And I think that's very important that we can relate that to the consumer, right? That it's already being used in the medical field to treat cancer
Yep.
and do other things. And so we're already, in a way, putting some of those into bodies and there's no negative issues. And in this case, we don't anticipate anything because we're consuming it. So,
Of course.
um, very, very good. Well, as we kind of wrap up our little discussion here on bacteriophages and some of the great work that you've been doing, maybe if you could provide a couple of key takeaway points you would like our listeners to have from our conversation today, I think would be really good.
Okay, yeah. So, key takeaways or take home message from, I will always talk when I'm teaching to my class. I always tell them, okay, do you know like 1 in 6 individuals are getting sick every year due to food poisoning? So if you're aware of, washing hands, um, clean, separate, cook and chill. Please apply all these techniques and or to make food safe and be aware of who is near to you, like elderly, your grandfathers, grandmothers, or new kids, or even like pregnant women, or people with other chronic conditions are always highly susceptible to these kind of illnesses. So be aware of who are you with, and also make sure you are safe and the people around you are also safe.
Mhm. Yeah, those are great key points. Food safety is number one, and we can't practice it enough, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very good.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, Cedros, one of the things I like to do with our speakers is really ask you a couple of additional questions after I've just spent
Mhm.
25 minutes asking a lot of questions. The first question we like to ask is there a resource book or a website that you think would be useful for our audience if they're interested in learning more about this topic?
So there are some government websites, and we can go to FDA and on GLV, or CDC is another website, and also USDA. There are several others, but these are one that we use and rely on them. And so please use those and get more information.
Absolutely. How about something that maybe you're reading today, a book that you are reading or that you've recently read that's not related to this topic that you think the listeners might enjoy reading?
So I enjoy traveling, right? Who not, right? Everyone does. So I like books that talks about the cities and the ancient towns and things like that. So I was reading one of my from where I am. So one of the book talking about the origin of the town and how relate to their civilizations. We connect their livelihood to the cities later on. So the book is by Buddhist Cider, and I enjoy reading that book always.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like travel too, so I'm a history person. I love to read things of history and how things came to be. So that sounds actually very good. The last question I'd like to ask you is if you can think of someone in your life that you define as successful, and success can look however you want it to look, what's a key trait that they possess that you think has allowed them to be successful?
So, when I was, doing my PhD in Texas Tech with Dr. Minifishius at that time. So, um, we've been, in touch since then, right? I have seen her develop her career from faculty on to USD Undersecretary and moving back to uh, the position at Texas Tech. So I have seen her always an idol in this field. I'm working from safety as well. Uh, the key points here is, even though there are several circumstances that will prevent you from moving forward, but if you believe on your instinct, if you believe on what you're doing is good, actually, right? If you trust yourself on what you're doing. So do not look back, always move forward, and there might be several, obstacles that may appear, but you can actually cross it with your behavior persistence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very good.
yeah, that,
Actually, very good. I just read a quote today of something like, the only way you can plow forward is to clear the road ahead, or something of that nature. I think that's exactly right. That persistence and trusting yourself and continuing to move forward is very
yes,
valuable to have in a person.
that is right.
Mhm. Well, I do want to thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure visiting with you. And again, I've thoroughly enjoyed learning more about what you're doing and the good work around food safety. Again, for our listeners today, this is Dr. Siroj Pokharel from Cal Poly University. Siroj, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for your time and inviting me on this platform.